All right, I think we're good to go. Hopefully. Ooh, one sec, it's a little peaky. I'm having connection issues, so if I disappear, which hopefully I won't, that's why. Hey Luke, welcome. All right, let's hop right in. So as I mentioned in my tweet, I've got a fair amount of, let me switch those, a fair amount of stuff to talk about today. So ACL is next week, if you're not familiar. That's one of the big conferences where people will share their natural language processing research. So some stuff related to that, and also just some other stuff. And today I've got ice water because it is hot here. Not as hot as I know some of y'all who are in India are right now. So cheers. I hope you also have something cold to drink at least. All right, so to kick it off, I know I mentioned the America's NLP last week workshop, which is going to be at NeurIPS, but they're also looking for mentors and also people who want to review articles. So if that's something you're interested in, check that out. The link to this forum is on their Twitter. Good thing to do. Starting on a high note. The next thing is, I don't know, there's some upsetting stuff sprinkled in here. I'll just warn you right now, but I've got like a high note to end it on, so something nice to look forward to. So Sophia Noble, if you don't know her, is a researcher who works on fairness and ethics, and does really good work and works with Tamik Gabru and the DARE, I think is the name of their working group, the DAIR, I think. I could be wrong on that. I have a hard time remembering remembering acronyms in particular. So, and they are kind of struggling to find, as many funds as they would like to be able to support their research. So it's an independent research organization, and it's a little disappointing because other projects have a much easier time finding money, and it's a bit of a bummer because they both do amazing work, and I would like to see them supported.
All right, I think we're good to go.
All right. Oh, finally. Okay, so just now, however many minutes we're into it, is when this video stream is catching up with me. So there is that much of a delay, and I think that's probably going to be a good couple minutes. All right. Moving on. So I've got a lot of stuff from Twitter today, and also a lot of papers and some articles. This one is from Yoav, who, if you don't know him, is a formal semanticist I don't know what his institutional affiliation is off the top of my head. Anyway, he's a researcher who has lots of opinions. I mean, same, relatable. And he tweeted about this talk that really compared sort of, current predictions and excitement around the field of machine learning and natural language processing with, where we've been historically. And I thought it was just a really interesting thing that he had live tweeted. And in particular, this figure from the talk, yeah, you can read that, is some papers that were from NeurIPS in 1987. So a robot that learns by doing, how neural networks works, including geometric invariances in higher order neural networks, performance measures for associative memories that learn and forget, an optimization network for matrix inversion, constrained differential optimization, and introduction to systems for implementing neural net connections on SIMD architectures. Which, I mean, I would not be surprised to see any one of those papers at NeurIPS this year. Maybe how neural networks work, paper titles, is a little, you'd have to have a lot to back that up at this point in NeurIPS history. But yeah, I think it provides some really helpful context. There was another discussion that I didn't include here on the age of papers that ACL papers in particular, that NLP organization I mentioned, reference, and a lot of them are not from 1987, let me put it that way, quite a bit more recent. So I think it's always helpful to think about historical context, especially because we're such a fast-growing field. Yeah, speaking about being a fast-growing field, so this is a paper, acceptance, congratulations, doing NLP and like psychological analysis on suicide notes. And it was accepted to the AI for Good track. And I would say I'm not super familiar with this conference. So maybe in the, in the realm of this conference, this makes a lot more sense. But I do have to wonder about the thought process of working on this particular task. And yeah, this is one of those things where I can think of far more malignant uses for it, for positive uses, right? So it's a situation where post-facto analysis is not going to do the individuals in question much good, but having the information to say accurately replicate that type of text could be, used for ill very easily. Anyway, I haven't read the paper, it's not out yet, it's just accepted. So I don't know, maybe it's much more nuanced and well thought out than I am worried about. But speaking of sort of thinking through research projects, Rachel Thomas, who is fantastic, sometimes I'm mistaken for her, and I take it as a great compliment. Hey, Yashasvi? Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Welcome to the stream. Good to have you. Had a really good discussion on metrics. So she is a applied math researcher and has done, if you're familiar with Fast AI, which is an online training program, a really, really good one I would recommend. She and I believe her husband, Jeremy Howard, run that. I'm pretty sure they're married, but if I get that wrong, I am sorry to have misinformed you. So this picture, wow, I am struggling today with reading. So this paper that she wrote, co-authored, really thinks through the fact that in machine learning, in artificial intelligence, heavily on metrics, and that has implications. As she, quotes here, or she and her author quote here, the principle is classically captured in Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes the target, it ceases to be an effective measure. And in sort of the psychology literature, you could almost think of this as the observer's effect. So being observed will change the behavior. And particularly in a system where the output of the system feeds back into the input of the system, it can definitely change behavior, right? So I'm just gonna adjust something on my screen so I can see things a little bit better. All right, we haven't disconnected again yet. I'm hopeful that we won't. So another paper on my always growing, rarely shrinking to read list. These are sort of the main points. So metrics can and will be gamed. I think we know that that's the case. Luke says I'm not a fan of this. Yeah, I'm assuming that's in reference to the this particular project. Yeah, also that is unbelievably sensitive data. That is very, very, very sensitive data, which should be handled with, the utmost care and respect. Anyway. So main points from the paper. Metrics can and will be gamed. Metrics tend to overemphasize short-term concerns. Many online metrics are gathered in addictive environs, and AI is very effective at optimizing metrics. So if you think about, this example from student test scorings and deciding, using that information to decide, whether to continue to employ teachers. As a result, you've got widespread cheating scandals as well as beloved teachers being fired. E.g., if student scores drop when the current school doesn't cheat, the teacher is penalized because they're standardized, right? Which means if everyone else is cheating, it will, shift the mean, and then you are now several deviations below the mean. More discussion of Goodhart's law. Even when participants can recognize the limitations or absurdity of the metrics in use, they may still end up acting on and internalizing such metrics, as analyzed in a case study of how U.S. News and World Regulation report rankings have pervaded law schools. So instead of, your focus being, Luke's clarifying that was the suicide note paper, instead of the, focus being on like, hey, I want to be, the best law professor I can and make sure that I'm really, helping students, and the school being like, great, we're going to help you do that and prioritize, everything that you need to be the best teacher you can. Then if other things are targeted, then that thing is going to go out the window, right? This is a great example that comes up over and over again. Essay grading software focuses on metrics like sentence length, vocab spelling, and subject-verb agreement, but ignores hard-to-measure aspects like creativity and also coherence. Meaningless gibberish essays created with sophisticated words score well. So this is, obviously that means the test is not testing the thing that you think you want to test, but also it means that if you, are growing up in a position of privilege and wealth and you can afford your, the tutor who knows all the in and outs of the automated test scoring, to be like, all right, you're just going to say, precipitate or something a lot in the essay and you'll get a good score. The student who doesn't know that and instead is focusing on writing, a well-argued essay is going to be hurt as a result. Metrics are often an invalid way of capturing the quality we care about. I think we all can think of an example when something measured was not the thing that actually was important. And then a bunch of examples of that. And then discussion of healthier ways to use metrics, which I think is really powerful and important. Use a slate of metrics to get a fuller picture, right? So you're looking at 10 things instead of one thing. Conduct algorithmic audits, and this is going to be, I believe, legally mandated in the EU, potentially. I don't know that we still have, if the full text of the DSA is it will eventually be passed has been shared. I haven't seen it. Combined with qualitative accounts, right? If qualitative just means like not using numbers, right? So like asking students, how is this teacher to work with? Maybe having them, describe their psychological safety in the classroom or something like that. Jorge, hello, welcome. Just another walking real-time data processing device saying hi. Hi, it's good to see you. Or involve a range of stakeholders, including those who will be most impacted. So I think very few teachers that I know who work with standardized assessment and are evaluated on them think that is a great way to do it. And most of them, when we've been talking about things, have been like, yeah, if I designed it, it would not be anything like this, even though they're the most impacted. So this is from the Ethical Principles for Data Science at Columbia. I think this is a press release from Columbia. Since we cannot know in advance every phenomenon users will experience, we cannot know in advance what metrics will quantify these phenomena. And also, some phenomena just aren't quantifiable, and that's okay. And then discussion of data sheets and model cards by Timothy Graham-Brew, who we just talked about, and then Meg Mitchell, who is at Hugging Face right now, as a way of talking about it, and then audits, and then this discussion of an ethical toolkit for engineering design practice, expanding the ethical circle to include the input of all stakeholders. So this is very similar to not participant-led design. Bachi Friedman, what's her values-led design, I think is the name of that framework. Anyway, so on the dangers of metrics, and always really enjoy her work, very thought through. She's worked, a lot with people in industry and academia, and has like a great understanding of what you can and can't do with math, and shouldn't do with math. All of which I think comes around to this next, I think this is actually a blog post from the Partnership AI nonprofit, which is something that I hadn't really run into much and have just sort of seen a lot of stuff around the last couple weeks. So I don't know that much about them, but this is a blog post specifically talking about in a particular setting, so in this case a newsroom, it makes sense to have ethical guidelines that are tailored to that setting. And I think that ties in well to, this discussion of like, hey, make sure you get all your stakeholders and consider the context and so on and so forth. So really two things that dovetail nicely together. If I were writing a paper, I would cite these two in the same paragraph. All right, and now we get into more of the papers, and less the sort of broad conceptual stuff. One of these days I'm going to get around to having like little divider screens, but today is not the day. All right. So this paper is, I believe this was from ACL. Yeah. So this is from ACL, the one that's coming up in Dublin this week. And it is very small. Let me zoom in. So this is a corpus that's going to be made available on Kiswahili, which is a very widely used lingua franca in Africa, for speech recognition test and evaluation. And I love this paper so much. So many things to love about here. So one, it's, people from the area. Where the language is used. So some folks from Mombasa, the government of Mombasa. I believe Dodoma University is in Tanzania, I think. And then Kathleen Sminyu, I might be saying that wrong, and Rebecca Rayakitimbo. Again, apologies if I'm saying any of these names wrong. It is not my intention to mispronounce them. And Britone Wasaru, perhaps, from the Mozilla Foundation, which has done a lot of work on, under-resourced languages. A big fan of the Mozilla Foundation. George says, mixed feelings about the metrics thing. My college entrance was decided by a machine 11 years ago, math, physics, and chemistry exams. But of course, we were 500 applicants, and I was selected. Yeah. You can both realize that a thing has benefited you and also that it is not of greater benefit to society at large, right? Like I also, full disclosure, I'm very good at taking standardized tests despite being dyslexic, because I read quite quickly even if there are a lot of errors. A high reliance on standardized tests probably helped me because I was not the most focused in school, and having, that sort of measure, I think really, made me a more attractive candidate to universities as well. So, but at the same time, like, I don't think they're fair, right? And thinking about this as someone who has taught university, I don't care, right? It's not a good measure of, how much someone is going to really thrive in that setting. And I think honestly, what is a good measure of whether someone's going to thrive in that setting is, interest and motivation, right? Do you want to be there? Are you interested in being there? Do you want to learn? Some of my favorite students have been, in the US we call them non-traditional students. Basically, if you didn't just come out of high school and then go into college, you're non-traditional. And adult learners are, so motivated. They're here because they know what they want to do. They have like specific goals, and this is in service of those goals. So yeah, anyway, that's a long tangent to say that, yeah, I understand those mixed feelings. Ooh, it's warm. I like it quite warm, but it's a little warm even for me. It's getting close to 90 in here, which is I don't know what that is in centigrade. It's over 30. Work by people living in the area where this tool is going to be the most useful, which you love to see. Collaboration with linguists, music to my ears, love for linguistic knowledge to be used in the service of communities that need it. Hi, Mansoor, welcome. Also, they cited me. It's always nice to be cited. That's not the main reason that I like this paper, though. And also, they have a really, really good sociolinguistic description. So they have this fantastic breakdown of dialects of Kiswahili, which is not not something I know off the top of my head for sure. But obviously, if you're, in the target population and this is a language you use every day and you're very familiar with it, you're gonna know more. So yeah, really good sociolinguistic discussion of dialect and variation, and how they were able to use linguists' field work, and then the breakdown by dialect / variation of the corpus itself. And a fairly sizable corpus, especially if you're building from scratch, and especially if it's a speech corpus. Those are, I've worked with speech data. It takes some time. Yeah. Oops, sorry, I missed a comment. Sorry, Twitch in particular is being a little bit rough to work with today. Diva says, algorithmic audit sounds interesting, like audit metrics that social media's sites decide their recommendations with. Yeah, so I think the algorithmic audits are more focused on why was this decision made, right? So what factors influence this decision, and what would I have to change the decision, is often one way that's sort of discussed, like a counterfactual. There's a lot of different ways to do algorithmic auditing, and the more complex and non-human readable the model is, the more difficult it is. But yeah, I would search algorithmic auditing if you're interested in learning more. And there'll be even more discussion coming up with the EU regulation, I'm sure. But anyway, great paper, goes into a lot of depth, really clearly thought through, and yeah, fantastic. I love to see it. This is the type of paper that's like, oh yeah. I could not do this work, and I'm so happy that it's being done. And also that it's not me doing it. You know what I mean? Not because I wouldn't want to do it, but because I shouldn't be doing it. All right, another paper. Is this one from ACL? This may be a preprint. Let me check my notes. I made a little note by the ones. Okay, so this is just a preprint, which means that as far as I know, it has not been accepted for publication. So this was looking at hate speech and incorporating racial, gender, and intersectional axes. So basically the interaction of race and gender, focused on African American English, and then also gender as a variable, I guess. Sorry, I didn't know how to finish that sentence. Yeah, interesting paper, and I think probably the main takeaway that I don't think is a big surprise for anyone. Does that little annotation thing pop up for you? It doesn't. Okay, great. We provide evidence that BERT-based models propagate this bias and show that balancing the training data for these protected attributes can lead to fairer models with regards to gender, but not race. So basically, big takeaway is, hey, there's bias here. You can, if you're using, BERT, you're going to propagate that, you're going to grow more of it, basically. And if you balance the training data, you can help mitigate that for gender, but not for race. Which I think in large part is probably due to the fact that gender differences tend to be much smaller than, in this case, I'd call this an ethnolect in the US. So the difference between African American English, and the terminology they're using here is standard American English, which I don't love, but it's the term they're using, is bigger than the difference between standard American English spoken by a man and standard American English spoken by a woman, if we're using just like a very, lossy way to represent gender. So interesting paper. Always helpful to see that, like, hey, demographic bias continues to be a problem. Bigger models do not fix it. All right. And so another demographics paper, and I believe this one is also a preprint as far as I know, so has not been published, and this is out of Google. I realized when I was pulling together the links, I have like a lot to say about Google this week. It's just they happen to do a lot of things. And this is looking at basically how to handle accented speech. And for this, they are using both accented to be both dialects of a language that are used by native speakers of that language, and also language produced by non-native speakers, and also speech produced by people with language disabilities and, you know, speech production disorders, which is, ooh, that's a that's a lot of things to consider all at once. Yeah, but basically they're sort of like, here's, you know, a review of how to benchmark. They're using the CORAL data, which is the Corpus of Regional African American Language in the US, looking at like areas like Atlanta, probably DC, Baltimore. No idea. I was going to say Puerto Rico and Virginia, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, you know what? No, that's probably not what that is. Those areas are not geographically or linguistically contiguous. Anyway, and then looking at, you know, various results. Yeah, and then the sort of the main point that they're making is that you probably don't want to. They would suggest not building a different model for each accent. They would suggest a big model with lots of accents included. I don't know that I would agree with that necessarily, but, you know. Anyway, so just sort of like a review paper that came across. Something else that really jumped out to me about this paper is that they talk about Timnit and Call Friend. Both of those are quite old at this point, and with language change, which, you know, think about, you know, if you have talked to someone in the US who is quite elderly, or if you have like recordings of them from when they were younger, they just don't sound the same as someone who is quite young right now. And some of that might be change, you know, that is stable within each person's lifetime, right? That you become more standardized in your, you know, career years, basically, and less standardized as a child and as an adult. But also it's that language just changes, and both of those are venerable at this point. So yeah. Yeah, and then they also added in L2, and then, oh, that's right, also Sociolex, which is what they call Chicano English, Cockney English, African American vernacular English. I guess, okay, so Voices of California is probably where you're getting the Chicano English. And then speech impairments. There's a lot of things in this paper, and it might be helpful for references, but yeah. Luke says, I have a lot to say about Google every day being an SEO. Yeah, fair. George says, thinking about bias, what are your thoughts on the Elon Musk's fisks for Twitter feeds manipulation, latest tweets versus the recommendations thing? Kind of hilarious. Well, I will say that that is going to be required by law in the EU, and also is implemented. So anyway, yes. I would say that community management, particularly at scale, is a very specialized skill set, and not everyone has learned how to do it. Ooh, that's my feeling on that. All right. On sort of like a lighter note, something that I am delighted by is this paper, which is also at ACL. Yeah, so it's just a long paper. I was just checking to see if it was in a particular workshop or anything. And it is a tree bank. So a tree bank. Hi, Hector. Good to see you. So a tree bank is a collection of parse trees. Well, they're not always parse trees, but basically words and language, parts of language strung together, have a hierarchical relationship to each other. So a good example of this is that the way that you do the verb in English depends on the subject of the sentence, right? So he walks, I walk. The verb changes depending on the subject. So there's a hierarchical relationship there where the verb is dependent on the subject. Don't come for me, syntacticians. I know about, verb-headed things. I'm explaining things. Anyway, so there's a hierarchical relationship there between things, and tree banks are collections of representations of these hierarchical relationships between words. And this one is in Irish, Celtic language spoken in Ireland. And it's noisy user-generated data. It's tweets. So really, really interesting in a number of dimensions. I think probably an extremely challenging thing to do. And of course, like as always, it's, people in the relevant language community that are doing the work, which again, I love to see it, right? Like that's what I want to see. Yeah, and I think that's in contrast to this paper where, I don't know, there's a lot of authors. So they might have somebody from each of the groups that they discussed in the authorship list, but I don't know, I might be a little bit surprised if that were so. Anyway, and I believe they have open sourced the trees, perhaps. Yeah, they're releasing the tree bank. So yeah, if you work in Irish, really exciting data set to have. And also, it's just good to have more languages and more data sets out there. Yeah. And then, of course, some examples of orthographic variation, which some of you may or may not know this, but orthographic variation was one of my research topics in grad school, so I'm always, I love to see it. So, removing diacritics, abbreviating. So here, I'm just going to guess, I don't speak Irish. Fior, maybe, as a shortening of Fioran, perhaps. Air or Aaron. Yeah, this has got to be Aaron, right? I'm pretty sure. I have a calc that has Aaron in it, so I'm pretty sure it's Aaron Go Bra, right? Which is like, I don't know what it means. It's a calc, but I'm pretty sure that's the word Aaron in there. Here we have like repetition, punctuation variation, transliteration. This must be pronounced will. BHFUIL. That must be pronounced will. That must be what they mean by that. And then Obama being treated as an Irish surname, which is delightful. Anyway, great research paper. You'll love to see it. Always makes me happy. All right, and now we're into the depressing stuff, so I hope you enjoyed that highlight. And this is, yeah, we talked about this a little bit, but basically data brokers, which we mentioned previously, are people who, well, businesses that collect and sell people's data, including yours and mine. And there's not much that we can do about it, and they just sell it, and you can use it, and by you, I mean, the various actors can use it to get around various privacy laws and regulations, and, it's bad. Anyway, it's a big, this year is like a white paper from the Irish Council on Civil Liberties discussing that this is a thing and sort of going into more details about it. And then this is only for the US and Europe, so going to be a little bit less relevant for folks outside of that area, but I imagine it still affects you. Something that definitely affects people outside of the US and Europe is that Google and Meta are, the rest of the world is fantastic, by the way. If y'all don't, follow them, I would highly recommend it. Are basically building internet using transatlantic cables to Africa. And those internet cables, which will, control presumably large portions of humanity's access to the internet, will be owned by private companies. So that's cool. Yeah, and this piece goes into a lot more discussion. And as they say, the cables also give US-based tech giants an unprecedented level of control. Yeah. And I'll say from the history of American infrastructure, having private companies owning, what should perhaps be basic public infrastructure tends not to work great. Anyway. Okay, fine. This one is also, I believe, just UK focused. So this is on the UK bill, the online safety bill, which I don't believe has passed yet. But this is a bill that proposes to improve online safety, but one of the things that it does is jeopardizing encryption, which is what allows you to send information back and forth without other people looking at it, basically. So things like credit cards or any sensitive information. So something to keep an eye on. George says, this week I heard that NLP is hard because of the dynamic nature of languages. If that's the case, would it be easier for NLP systems to understand Latin, a dead language, rather than English? Great question. I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by understand. In general, I think that Latin is, yes, right, it's not in... not a lot of noisy user-generated text in Latin, right? Not a lot of people tweeting in it. I'm sure there's some nerds out there. Don't at me. I say this as a nerd. Part of the reason that people really like Latin, at least historically, is that it is very it's very regular, right? As a language, it's very ordered. And of course, the things that Latin turned into, like French and Spanish and Italian and, Romanian, all of those sorts of things, Portuguese. I can stop listening to Romance languages now. You get the point. Are living languages and much more, varied. The nice thing about Latin model is that it'll work as well in 200 years as it does now, unless Latin does the thing that Hebrew did, which feels unlikely to me. I would say that we have some very antique models that work okay. So there's a poetry generator, a manual built object that generated poetry in Latin in, I want to say the 1890s that works perfectly well. So yeah, but my second question is, I guess my question for you is, yeah, sure, it would be easier, but it's easier because no one's using it, right? The thing that makes it challenging is that people are using these systems and interacting with them and updating them constantly. And that's what makes it good to have a tool that interact with those systems as well. I don't need a Latin spell correct. And I would also say, why would you choose to prioritize Latin over a language that people are using and do need additional tooling in, right? So, Tamil, for example, I probably personally, if I had a choice between working on Latin and Tamil, would, hopefully in collaboration with people from the community who are using Tamil and, are looking for the tool and being able to directly address an existing need in the community where it is relevant, would much prefer to work on Tamil because it has the potential to help people, yeah. Language is hard, right? Language is hard and language is special, and that's what makes linguistics a field. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, right? It's just the way it is. And we wouldn't be able to do the things that we can do with language if it wasn't hard and special. All right. Continuing just the brigade of crappy news. So this is a weekly newsletter on authoritarianism and technology, and last year in particular, there were some really successful campaigns to either ban the use of facial recognition technology or weaken it significantly, which is something that I strongly support, and we can talk about that if anyone has any questions. And a lot of them are getting overturned, including one in Virginia, where I live, which sucks. I was so proud when it got passed, and now it's been, it'll be phased out July 1st, so. Anyway, so more discussion here, more background if you're interested. And this is Coda's Story is the site, and then the newsletter is Authoritarian Tech, which, again, kind of a bummer. I promise I have a pick-me-up at the end. And then we have a section of me just ragging on Google. I just put these together so it wasn't quite so sprinkled around. Lies. Just absolutely incorrect. So this is a story from The Independent that is basically a DeepMind press release that they published as news. Oh my God. There's a reason that I did not open the link. Yeah, a generalist agent that can carry out a huge range of complex tasks, from stacking blocks to writing poetry. It is... I would not call this human level. Also, on the sort of like overstating the performance of systems, this one's from Sundar Pichai, who's the CEO of Google, talking about, is it the Palm model, right? Yeah, it's yet another model, and they're saying like, oh, it's better than data from Star Trek because it understands humor. Again, just like straight up inaccurate representations of systems. And this is so dangerous because people believe it, right? So we talked about Tesla Autopilot a couple weeks ago. And the vast majority of people, if you're like, hey, Tesla Autopilot, what does it do? Will tell you it is self-driving because it's been misrepresented intentionally to make it seem more good and valuable. And I kind of think that's what they're doing here. Oh, and this is the last one, I promise. So this is also... there was for the same thing where that thing where the Palm capabilities were misrepresented. To my belief, I believe that they were being misrepresented. There was a slide that had like a lot of ways of writing Google Translate behind it. And as it turns out, every single one of the ones that was in non-Latin script, so Latin script is like what this is written in, right? The alphabet, alpha, beta, and so on, were wrong. So just a little sampling of that from Sam Ettinger, D. Hamar Skjold, on Twitter. He made a helpful annotation, or the Cyrillic ones. The Cyrillic ones were right. Yeah, so here we have some different examples. And these are, oh, sorry, it doesn't say Google Translate. It's the name of the language. Oh yeah, so I see Talk Piston right there. It's a Creole from Papua New Guinea. So the names of the languages were all written incorrectly. So this was Sudanese dialect. The letters should have been connected and should have been written the other direction. Lhasa Tibetan, vowel and subjoined KH letters shifted way to the right. So you can see that here they're sort of like nicely stacked on top of each other, and here they're sort of like jiggered side to side. Saraiki, perhaps? I'm sorry if I'm saying that right. Letters disconnected and left to right, so in the wrong order and also not connected as they should be. San language, missing the high tone diacritic at the end. This one. Mid-tone diacritic too squashed, so this one where it looks like it's connected. Marwari, sorry, I'm having a hard time here. Nukta and last vowel slid to the right, so this little mark and stuff has been disconnected. It should be on top. Chittagonian, nukta and final vowel shifted right. Kandrabindu causes mid-word split. I drew it in by hand because I could not get it to show up in the right place either, but my excuse is that I'm using MS Paint, which is like a drawing program that comes for free on Microsoft computers. And then Balinese language, final vowel diacritic, this one, is a little far left, but it's still technically over the great letter. Great job. So just a litany of things that were slightly wrong. But again, people who use this language, right, like the stakeholders, the people who care and are the ones in the community would probably not have done wrong. Anyway, colonialism. Luke says, a lot of nonsense coming out of Google and Google acquired entities when it comes to AI. It's almost as if they're defending their enormous spending on it to shareholders or something. Yeah, Med says, I love when people see cherry-picked examples and thinks the models always work that well. Yeah, yep. And it's, I understand why it happens, right? Like, you know, we've all done it. Well, I've certainly done it. Most people I know who work in the field have done it. You know, you've trained a model, you're trying some test cases, and you're like, this one's exactly right. It's so good. And you run over and you show it to your friend, like, look what it did. And it's like, you're like a proud parent, but you're ignoring the fact that like your child spelled one word correctly and the rest of them are just like little handprints. And the thing that was spelled correctly was just by accident, basically. I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit uncharitable, but like, I get it. I get the desire to cherry pick, but also it's not honest and it's not helpful. So the framework we talked about the last 2 weeks, actually, the real framework for the discussing the limitations of ML work, I think it can be a really helpful way to help get out of that trap. All right. Ooh, this one was in the wrong place. It should have been over in another tab, but we'll talk about it now. That's fine. So this is a paper from FACT. So Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency in Machine Learning. It's probably one of maybe the main conference for ethics and machine learning, if you're interested in learning more. And this paper talks about how different groups prioritize ethical values for responsible AI. So really interesting discussion, talks about private companies, public sector organizations, and academic groups, and sort of their, the ways that those interests sort of press up against each other. Which I think, again, ties back to, if this had been in the right place, this would have been much more coherent. What Rachel Thomas was talking about when, make sure that you're involving stakeholders, that you're not relying too much on metrics. Same thing in the ethics space, right? Who cares about what, and how do you make sure that people aren't getting hurt? Which is always this is sort of my foundational ethical principle, right? Is that people right now, right here, aren't getting hurt, and there's not a obvious potential for that to happen in the future. And obviously, different people have different focuses, but that's fine. George says, recommended video: Why the Rise of New Cloud-Based Ruling Class is Crushing Democracy. Yanis Varoufakis, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. It can be useful to understand Google, Facebook decisions. Yeah, it sounds like a good resource. Thank you. Yeah. Anyway, we shouldn't hurt people, and corporations aren't people, and that's my that's my ethical foundations, basically. All right, and I promised I'd end on a high note, so here's my high note. If any of you were really into Wordle, I was not especially, but I do like word searches. So there's a new Wordly type game where there's one game a day called Cell Tower. Let's start. And basically the idea is there are contiguous regions where within that region, if you look at all the tiles, left to right, top to bottom, it will spell a word. So let's see if I can find one. And there is one solution, and the solution will account for all of the letters. So here I see something that looks like it could be Friday. Is invalid onset in English, so it's definitely going to be FR. FR. I can't get to that E, I don't think. Yeah, see, the regions must link up. Anyway, if you like games, there's one a day. It's a pretty low investment, time investment. Yeah. And we got a couple minutes. I'm going to go through and do a little bit of a puzzle, right? Fries. Got it. Sorry, I had to look at it and think for a bit and not talk. All right, and then if any of you play Cell Tower, sorry for making your life more difficult. Okay, so I need to use this P as well. I feel like it's probably per. There could be copper, but there's only a C over here. Oh, copier. Copier? Yeah, and then repeat EBS. I feel pretty good about copper. Repeat. Okay, then I'm gonna need to use this P. Maybe I like that one better, because then I have an who's here. Okay, yeah, no, it's definitely that one. And then who's. I hope you like watching people. WHO. All right. Well, my dyslexia has got me again. Anyway, I'm really ahead of you, so I'm just sort of killing time while waiting for the chat to come back up, to catch back up to where I am. PB. Is that a... I don't know that that's a valid onset either. Anyway, I may have gotten myself in an unsolvable state. You get the idea. It's a fun puzzle if you like word games, and if you do linguistics, you probably like word games. So I'm gonna wrap it there for today. I do feel like I ragged a lot on Google. To be fair, I also ragged some on Meta. You know, we talked about an article that talked about Clearview AI, which continued to be near the top of my list of companies that are doing bad things and should feel bad. Anyway, thank you for joining me today, everybody. I hope this was enjoyable and not too depressing. And let's go back to that Kiswahili. Oh, yes. This is the type of work that I love to see. If you're a researcher or have a little bit of extra capacity or want to mentor, where is it? I can't find my tab anymore. The Americas NLP is looking for reviewers and folks to help out with that. So fun thing to do if you like reviewing. Yeah, and I'll see y'all next week. I don't know that I'm going to keep this on Saturday long term. I may or may not. I'll figure it out. But yeah, really nice chatting with y'all. I hope this was an enjoyable experience, and I'll see you all later. Bye.